Friday. We are now live with contract training, second part of the 4-part series. Today we're going to cover the buyer broker agreement and agency, and we'll get to the initial items that when you open up a transaction here at KW Metro, what you need to have for that initial review that Mark, our fabulous compliance director, will review. Just a point, we're only going to be to like maybe an hour, 55 minutes, an hour today. Burger Bob did something bad and double booked himself. And unfortunately, I could not change this other appointment. So you're share that for you guys.
Yeah, you were freezing a little bit there, Robert. I don't know if it's my end or your end, but
What's that?
I said you were freezing a little bit, but I don't know if it was my end of the internet connection of being slow or if it was your end.
Oh, okay. I was going to do it this way. Make sure everybody can see this. I think I'm going to have to go into the KW Metro. It's on there, Mark, right?
Yeah, you could.
For some reason, doing it in a PDF is not working.
Okay. Just do a search for initial in the search bar there, and you'll. Or is it initial or opening documents? I can't remember what the title is.
Well, it's in here. I know that. Here it is. No?
No, I think it says opening documents or initial documents or something like that. There you go. Transaction open. Well, that's the Word document. That's fine. That'll work.
All right, so let's make this work. I apologize, you guys. For those of you joining, welcome. So here's where we are today. What we're going to do is review. Let me get this bigger. And everybody can see that.
Yeah, it could be bigger. Can you go to the full screen or?
That is full screen.
Oh, okay. Then it just go. Yeah, go to 150. That's better. Yeah.
Okay, so opening documents for a brand new purchase here at KW Metro.
And actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is an older document because it has the PED in there, but that's okay because we can still just go with. How about this one? That's one right down there. That one, 22.
That one.
That there you go.
That okay. Here we go.
Okay, great.
You need to have submitted within 2 business days. Even if it's on the buy side, you need an agency disclosure, the fair housing, the PRBS, the wire fraud, residential purchase agreement, and we're going to discuss wire fraud again on next week's training. The RPA, the buyer inspection advisory, the Fair Appraisal Act addendum, CCPA, consumer protection, an HID for your protection, get a home inspection, the estimated buyer costs, the comparative market analysis, the market conditions advisory, the affiliated business arrangement disclosure and additional agent acknowledgement, if applicable, and agent's visual inspection disclosure. Welcome to the state of California, where we have a form for everything. And we have a lot of forms for everything. So that's a lot just to get a contract open. Back in my days, it just used to be a purchase agreement when I first started, but things have changed since then. So that's what you will need. That is located in the KW Metro Associate folder under the KW Metro Procedures Compliance, and it is labeled KWSDM Transaction Opening Documents. You know what? Great thing is if you have a transaction coordinator you hired, they're going to have it. But if you are insane enough to want to do your own transactions, good luck on that. That's where you would access it. Okay. So into the buyer, the contracts that we're going to learn today. Okay. Very first thing is the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships, or Form AD. And this explains agency to your principals. In the state of California, there's two types of agency. There's single agency and dual agency. We'll review those. The question is asked, when should you, and this is just a disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. It's not a contract in any way, it's a disclosure. So California real estate law requires that you as an agent disclose agency relationship to your principals as soon as possible. Meaning as soon as you possibly can. So for instance, let's say you're doing your lead generating and you're prospecting, you do an open house, and you actually convert a buyer to a buyer consultation. So the best time to do that would be at that initial consultation, and it should be done, it needs to be done right at the top of the consultation. And then here's how it kind of presents itself. You bring the buyer in, you sit down, you're having your niceties and your pleasantries and you're discussing, and then you have a little saying like this. You're going to go, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I appreciate your time today. Before we get into our meeting to determine what exactly you're looking for, I'm required by the state of California, the Department of Real Estate, to disclose to you what real estate agency relationship is. And it's just a disclosure, and they have a form that we need to review and have you sign. It's not a contract. It doesn't bind you to me in any way. And again, here's the form, or you can send it to them digitally to DocuSign, but it should be done at that meeting. It should be done at the meeting if you're doing a listing presentation as well too. So the law is written that it should be presented as soon as possible. So get in the habit of your initial buyer consultations of doing that, so that you can cover your basis and get that law that you're required to do taken care of. Agency defines two different types. There's a seller's agent and then the buyer's agent. And it says right here, when you when you enter into a discussion with a real estate agent regarding a real estate transaction, you should from the outset understand what type of agency relationship or representation you wish to have with the agent in the transaction. So that's kind of what a synopsis of what I said. But we have the seller's agent and the buyer's agent, and this basically is describes what it is, and it's basically a fiduciary duty. So what is a fiduciary duty? Fiduciary duty basically means above all others. Above all others. So as a seller's agent or a buyer's agent, you're going to put that principal, that client, that prospect above your interests, the broker's interests, the other party's interests to the transaction. You're putting that person front and center, and you have a fiduciary duty to exercise a reasonable skill and care in the performance of those duties, the duty to be honest and fair and fair dealing and good faith, and a duty to disclose all facts known to the agent materially affecting the value or desirability of the property that are not known to or within the diligent attention and observation of parties. And an agent is not obligated to reveal to either party any confidential information obtained from the other party that does not involve the affirmative duties set forth. Basically, that means if I don't have agency with you, I'm not required to reveal anything to you. If I don't have a buyer broker sign with you, I'm really technically not required to reveal information to you. So that breaks down the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. In every transaction, there's one on each side. And that would be single agency. And then dual agency is where an agent is representing both seller and buyer. So for an example, you have a listing and a buyer comes in, wants you to write an offer. That's one way for a dual agency. So you, of course, broker policy, if you're a brand new agent, you can't do dual agency as one of your first 3 deals because they're kind of sticky transactions, and I don't want you to want to get out of the business within your first deal. And I remember my first dual agency, my first year, I almost quit real estate. It was that hairy. So we kind of want to have you not do that until you really understand and know how to navigate through a transaction. So that's what dual agency would be, is you're a listing agent, you have a buyer that wants to buy that same property, and you represent both parties with the agreement from both of those parties that it's okay. And then the other way of dual agency is we have a listing at KW Metro, and one of you represent a buyer, but another agent in our office is the listing agent. That's still dual agency because it's under the same broker, i.e. me, and brokerage, KW Metro, or signature. So, and it's only within the KW office or the signature office. They're two separate offices, two separate brokerages. It's not with any other Keller Williams either. So if the listing agents with KW Metro and the selling agents with KW, the buyer's agents with KW Metro, then that's dual agency, or the same thing with signature. And that's pretty much agency in a nutshell. You'll fill that out, have the buyer sign it, and you just, anytime you have somebody sign a document, they always have to get a copy of it. So just remember that. Mark, anything in there you want to highlight?
Just that this form explains the different kinds of agency. It doesn't actually create the agency relationship. That happens when the purchase agreement is signed.
Okay. And then the next one, we discussed this yesterday with the RLA, the Residential Listing Agreement, but this is the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory, new form, developed 26th of June of this year. Brand new form, and it's just basically, we just need to make sure that we are all operating within the fair housing guidelines in all of our real estate transactions. And it discusses who those fair housing, the protected classes in the fair housing are right here in the middle of the form. So be aware of what that form is, and if anybody asks you, basically it just says, we operate under the fair housing rules and regulations in regards to when we help people buy or sell homes. Now we get into buyer representation exclusive. So why do you want to have this form? Mark, why do you want to have this form?
My official answer to a buyer would be because I can only work with so many buyers at a time, and I am going to be committed to you, working with you, exclusively, and I want you to do the same thing with me. We're showing one another that we trust one another and that we're willing to work with one another, because the only way that I get paid is when we find a home for you and your transaction closes. If you work with some other agent, then that agent would be paid if they wrote the offer for you. So, I want to work with you exclusively, and I'd like you to do the same with me.
And it establishes a true business relationship, which is you are business owners. And just like an attorney or a doctor, if you hired an attorney is going to have an agreement that you're going to need to sign. It basically says, here's how I work and here's the money you're going to owe me. So why don't you just treat yourself as a professional like an attorney would, and put your prospects, if you're working with them, especially if they're a buyer in this market, to have them be loyal to you. But some agents will have a separate agreement called a loyalty agreement, but it's not enforceable if we ever had to pursue the buyer to remedy the contract. Mark, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay.
Well, I guess I could say that in section 1A, if our templates, our Metro templates are installed in the zip form program, some of this information in 1A is going to be pre-filled in. And I'll let you explain 1A from, or wherever you want to start, section 1.
So you pull up the form, you put in the buyer's name. We have Joe Buyer today. Grants, obviously the broker, not the agent, the broker. Keller Williams Realty, San Diego Metro, or signature. Since I'm teaching for signature as well too. And the beginning date would be today's date. The buyer decided they're going to work with me, and when do I want to end this? So that's a good question, and that is open to interpretation. It's open to the prospect. It's open to how quick you think you can get them into a house, how motivated they are. If they're highly
Availability,
motivated, you know what, you can
availability
make
of
a-
inventory availability.
yeah, sorry, Mark, I was hearing some noise and I'm like, who is that? Yeah, but it is inventory availability. In this market, it might take someone 6 months for a buyer to be able to find the house that they want with a seller that's willing to negotiate the price. That's the hardest challenge for a buyer right now, is sellers haven't realized that they need to lower their price in some degrees, lower their sell price. So you could pick your time period. My recommendation is probably 6 months minimum. So October, November, December, January, March, April. So I'm going to make it good until April 27th. That is it, and it basically says if there's any transaction that occurs during this period, then we are duly authorized to be able to receive some sort of payment. Section 1A talks about what is the property to be acquired? It's any purchase, lease, or other acquisition. So it's really of any real property or manufactured home described in, now it says location. Some people will put San Diego County, but then what happens when they go out and they look in San Diego County and they decide they want a house, but they can't afford what the house is, and all of a sudden they want to go to Riverside, like Temecula, Manatee, Murrieta. Well, it wouldn't cover you there. So have real clear expectations with that buyer. Where are you searching? Is it just San Diego County, or is it also, are we going to look at Orange County or Riverside? Because a lot of agents are doing that these days. So you have to have that through the buyer consultation and get them all on board. But I'm going to leave that as the example of how you fill that out, San Diego County. Now you can do certain zip codes. I've had agents do buyer broker agreements because the buyer didn't know if they wanted to buy in North County or South County. So they had a BRE for everything from the 52 freeway south. And the other agent had everything from the 52 freeway north. And so may the best person win. Or other, I don't know what other is, but it's other. And the price range, and I think what it is filled in automatically, Mark, it says to be determined.
Yeah, we usually have to be determined pre-filled in there. But if you're going to put numbers in the price range field, I encourage you to use realistic numbers. In other words, don't put $1 to $1 million, you know, because you're not going to find a property for $1. And the reason that I suggest that is because you don't want to put, you know, information into an agreement that isn't accurate, because then that agreement can be, you know, taken apart and said, well, you know, that's not accurate. How did you expect to ever find a property for $1? And that, you know, little things like that can invalidate an agreement in a legal, you know, situation. So we just say to be determined and to be determined in the price range.
What's that?
I said we just say to be determined in both of the price range fields.
Yeah, and for some reason it's not letting me input something there. I don't know why. Probably a zip form place right now. Section 1A2 talks about the following: specified properties only. So let's say you have a buyer consultation and they're not ready to be exclusive with you for a 6-month period, but they're willing to be able to be exclusive with you with all the homes you're going to show them that day. So you could check this box and put see attached list, which of course they need to sign on as well too. And let's say it's all the homes that you're going to go tour that day. And then at least you'll know you get paid on those homes. And then if they only want to do it each and every day when they take you out, you can do it that way with this one.
1A2. Go ahead, Robert.
Or section 3, it's only the properties identified in the tax list. So it could be a specific property where you put the address here, 1234 Main Street, or the list attached.
And maybe a use case for 1A2 would be, you're trying to marry a buyer and a seller together, and the seller's off market, and the buyer, somehow of this property, and it's for a specific property only. So
So on that, that's a dual agency where you call me, get approval, because I need to know what the scenario is, and then you have to get the buyer to sign a BRE with you. And then section B talks about what brokers agree to exercise due diligence, reasonable efforts. And then C, broker will perform its obligations under this agreement or another real estate licensee assigned by the broker. So what this paragraph basically means is you're with KW Metro or Signature, you get a BRE. The BRE is with the brokerage. It's not really with the agent, it's with the brokerage. If you were to ever leave KW Metro or Signature, that BRE stays with this brokerage, and I could assign it to another agent. If I wanted to, the likelihood of that happening is pretty nil, because when people leave and they have a BRE with somebody, I just say, have fun, good luck. We don't want to keep that business. And it's just too much for us to chase after that. It's just too much, but that's what this paragraph is for. There are some people that are really tight with their BREs and with some of their agents, and they want to make sure that they get every nickel and dime from them. We're not that way. Section 2 again of this is just basically a review of the agency and where agency relationship is. I'm not going to belabor that other than just say it's the same thing as on the agency form. And 1A talks about the disclosure, B talks about buyer representation, C talks about possible dual agency with the seller if we have a listing in-house, or I have a listing that I can help sell you. Section 2 here really is for a broker's firm list properties for sale only. They don't, if I understand this, will prevent the broker from showing the buyer properties. But it basically says that the broker will be the exclusive agent of the buyer and not a dual agent also representing the seller. So basically, that section basically on single agency is really protecting the buyer. Same thing on the other II. Broker firm does not list property. There actually was a day, and it was like in 2004, there was a guy that used to advertise downtown, only represented buyers. I don't see him anymore. I think he probably died because the buyers wore him out. But that's what this box would be if they only just represent buyers. They don't list properties. And D is any other potential buyers, meaning we might represent other buyers that are going to make offers on properties. And you're okay with that because we'll probably have a buyer broker with somebody else that might be looking in the exact same neighborhood. And section E talks about non-confidentiality of offers. Buyers advise that the seller or listing agent may disclose the existence, terms, or conditions of a buyer's offer unless all parties and their agent have a signed written confidentiality agreement. Mark, can you give me a real life?
Can I give you what?
A real life example on that?
Non-confidentiality in 2E, is that what you're asking about?
Yeah.
I think that not a written confidentiality agreement might be used in a situation where maybe the buyer doesn't want, maybe the buyer is an influencer or some type of a celebrity or something like that, and maybe they don't want to have information revealed about what kind of offers they're making to acquire a price, because maybe they feel like that would be, bid. They'd be outbid or something, or the seller would say, well, that person has a lot of money, they can afford to pay more, So I'm getting a little bit off the subject as far as what non-confidentiality of offers, but basically it's saying that the buyer is advised that these terms may be disclosed unless there's a separate written agreement. And to be perfectly honest with you, I've never encountered a buyer representation agreement that had a confidentiality agreement associated with it. And so it's a pretty rare circumstance. But like we talked about in the last training, these forms are designed for statewide use in many, many different markets and situations. So sometimes there's terms and conditions in there that, you know, just don't apply in our marketplace, but would be applicable in others.
Thank you, Mark. And then section F, it's basically confirmation of agency relationship. If it's 4 units or less, broker shall confirm the agency relationship prior to or concurrent with the execution of a property contract or a purchase agreement. Section 3 addresses compensation to broker. And the compensation that we outline, we actually have, as you see right here, an addendum. And it's the addendum that is preloaded in the templates that specifies how the payment will come from from 4 or 5 different scenarios that we learned over time. But for this purposes, I'll show you that you can put in a percentage if you wanted to there, or you can put in a dollar amount if you wanted to there, or you check this box because we're going to go to the addendum. And I'm going to outline that addendum after I go through the entire buyer broker agreement. So you can see what the different compensation schedules are there.
You would want to only complete one of those 3 choices. So 3A1, 3A2, or 3A3. You wouldn't complete all of them.
Yes.
Because then you'd have conflicting terms.
Check only one.
Correct.
Read the form, please. You guys should read the form word for word. There's a lot of questions I get asked all the time about certain things. I'm like, go to section 12B. I want you to read that section of the purchase agreement. B addresses the compensation payments and credits that basically says the buyer is obligated to compensate us for the work. However, if anyone other than the buyer compensates broker for services covered by this agreement, that amount shall be credited toward the buyer's obligation to pay compensation. What does that say? Well, right here it says, hey, I'm going to go out and show you properties that are through the MLS. And if the MLS is offering me a 3% commission, I'm going to get it from them. I'm not going to charge you. So we're going to credit you that amount. So that's what that basically says right there. It just credits the amount that the buyer broker is getting in their purchase agreement. Section C addresses the right for the broker to receive that compensation during the representation period, or if it's been extended, for any buyer that enters into an agreement to acquire property. We shall be entitled for that. So basically it says, if you make an offer on a property and we're basically now entitled to the commission we would have received, even if you breach the agreement on that property and you cancel the contract. Now, will I as broker chase after that with the buyer? Probably not. But that's, some people in the state of California wanted that in there. And then C2, this addresses all the properties that you actually showed a buyer during the BRE period. And then let's say it expires. So you did 3 months and then it expires. Well, I'm going to protect myself. You're going to protect yourself by putting in, if within 60 calendar days after the expiration of this representation period or any extension, buyer enters into an agreement to acquire a property. In other words, it was one of the properties that you showed them. Then you would still owe commission to the brokerage under that agreement. But you have to do one thing. The obligation to pay that compensation means that within 3 calendar days after expiration of the agreement, broker, you as the agent will give the buyer a written notice of those properties which broker introduced to the buyer or for which the broker acted on the buyer's behalf. Section D is the timing of when it's paid, either upon the completion of a transaction, if the acquisition is prevented by default of the buyer, upon buyer's default, which I have rarely enforced. I don't think most brokers don't. They're like, just let it go. But some people, if it was a big commission, we might want to go after it. Or if acquisition is prevented by another person within the transaction, let's say that the seller actually breached the agreement, and you as the agent go and want to sue that seller because they caused you financial harm and you prevailed and you got a cash judgment, you got a judgment, an award. Well, we're going to figure out some simple little formula to compensate a portion of what we would have got. And Section D outlines that.
I have a question. Maybe we pose it to the group. And on 3C, that section where it talks about the agent creating a list of the buyers who the broker introduced to the property. Or
Mark, can you continue? I have to check on a delivery.
Sure. In 3C, we were talking about how it says after expiration of this agreement or any extension, broker gives buyer a written notice of those properties which broker introduced buyer or for which broker acted on buyer's behalf. Throw this out to the people in attendance. How would you create a list like that?
Yeah,
Anybody?
Mark, can you repeat the question?
Sure. It's this section 3C, the very 3C2 at the very end. It's talking about how the buyer's agent would need to provide the buyer in this buyer broker agreement with a list of the properties that they showed during the time that they were obligated by this agreement. So my question was, how would we create that list of buyers that we showed properties to, or list of properties that we showed the buyer? That got my words kind of backwards there. So I mean, like, let's say you worked with this person for 2 months or however long this is, and maybe you on every weekend you went and looked at 2 properties and none of them were right, you know, or whatever. How would you make up that list of all those properties that you showed them? There's a couple different ways. They're really actually pretty simple.
I don't know the proper way to do it, but the way I was doing, I would put the list of the properties that I showed, the date, and it was one other column.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point, because you said it the correct way. Well, there isn't really any correct way. I mean, but that's one way. You know, maybe when you go to the properties, you print out the buyer MLS listing, and you just collect those in a little notebook that's for that buyer, or maybe you scan them, or however you choose to keep them. Another way that you can find the list of these properties that you showed were through the lockbox records, through the central lock service. They keep a track of who accessed that property on any given day. So that might be a way to prepare that list as well.
The best, when I bought my home, the last home I just bought, our agent, when they were helping us, printed up the entire list and put it in a booklet. And so of all the homes we were going to go see while we were on our buying journey for 3 days. So you should have, every time you go show a buyer, and we won't go into how you should show, how long you should show, et cetera, how many homes, but I would say you should have all the MLSs printed out that you're going to go see that day, and that's your record. And you should give that to the buyer and say, put them in a folder and say, what I'd like you to do is keep this as your record. When we go into houses, you can use this to make notes on it so you can remember details about the house.
Okay, that's good to know. I was printing them out for my records, but I wasn't giving them to the buyer.
You learn these things as you become more seasoned about, oh, what can I do for a little extra touch?
It's like, it's also, I look at that like a value added service, like you're creating this, guidebook or, for your buyer. That's one of the reasons why they're going to agree to have work with you and sign this agreement. It's because of those value added services that you're bringing to the table.
Okay.
All right. Section E addresses the irrevocable assignment of the compensation to us. Basically says that the buyer assigns that irrevocably. F describes what a buyer is. A buyer includes any person or entity other than the broker, someone related to the buyer, or who in any manner acts on buyer's behalf to acquire the property described in paragraph 1A. So in cases like this, it would be for maybe an entity buyer. They are representing a trust. They want to buy in a trust, or they want to buy as a corporation. Or in some cases, maybe they might be an attorney. They might have a power of attorney on behalf of the buyer. And this happens a lot with military people as they're in the buying process. They might get orders and get shipped out. And then they can designate someone as the power of attorney to help them just on this one transaction. G reviews that the buyer has not previously entered into a representation with another broker regarding the property other than the broker listed here. So if you have a buyer that came from another agent because they work with another agent, you got to ask that question. Did you sign an exclusive with them? Because if they did sign an exclusive with them and they didn't get released of it, that buyer could be responsible for paying that broker compensation. So check on that. And then section 2, buyer warrants that buyer has no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker regarding property unless buyer acquires the following properties. So if there's this
that would be a situation where the buyer had worked with another agent at another brokerage previously, had a buyer representation agreement. And like we talked about a few minutes ago, that buyer's agent, when that agreement ended, gave this buyer a list of the properties that they showed them. And then that would apply in this 3G2.
And then 3 is if buyer acquires a property specified in 3G2 above during the time buyer is obligated to compensate another broker, then we're not entitled to that compensation, as Mark was talking about. Nor are we obligated to represent that buyer in that transaction. 4 addresses internet advertising, blogs, and social media. Basically to get the buyer to acknowledge and agree that the properties are being distributed through an IDX feed through the MLSs, and we have no control over that information, nor are we responsible for any information that is out there that we didn't have a hand in. Section 5, this is the broker's job description. This is basically, we're going to help you locate properties, assist you with financing, provide a list of professionals or vendors during the escrow period, help order reports, schedule and attend meetings and appointments, provide you guidance, and help make sure your lender, I don't know why that's in there, but attain a credit report on buyer, that's really handled by the lender. But it's in there because there are some people in the state of California that also are probably doing both. Section B, again, job description, help you conduct a diligent inspection of the property, deliver and communicate to buyer any disclosures that you would need, and help facilitate the escrow process. The scope of broker duty basically says, what are our limits? What are the limits of the broker, and how, that's kind of what scope is. What's the extent to which we have duties?
This kind of separates, what the broker and the agent can do and what the buyer has to do. There's a certain amount of things, there's a division, let's call it, of things and responsibilities that buyers have to do themselves and agents can assist in, but cannot do them for the buyer. So I think this section explains some of the detail of what those duties are for each party.
So if you look at 6BV, I, right here, this one right here, shall not be responsible for inspecting public records or permits concerning the title or use of the property. So that's an example. So there's a lot of examples in there, but it basically is what we can't do. What are we limited to doing?
We can help the buyer and say, here's how you do that, but we cannot do that for them.
Yes. And then C, broker owes no duty to inspect for common environmental hazards. So that limits us. So in essence, it's kind of a protection for us about what it says we can and cannot do. So know what that is. And if it's a legal matter, you got to refer them to an attorney. If they want information about putting an ADU on the back of their property, they have to go research. 7 addresses the buyer's obligations. This is what they have to do. They have to be, agree to timely view and consider properties that we've selected for them. They're going to get financing put in place. They should have done it before you take them out, but this states that they're going to do it within 5 days from the execution of this agreement. So if you sign it today, within 5 days, they got to get their, you don't want to take a buyer out unless they've been pre-approved with financing. Not in this market, not in this market. Make sure that they've gone through a lender and they've gone through everything they need to do before you even put them in your car. This is the buyer's obligations also, as well as they're obligated to read all the documents that we provide you. This is kind of our broker get out of jail with a buyer when they try and accuse us for not helping them with something. I'm like, well, you have the duty to inspect and read before you sign something. And then section B addresses a form called the BMI, biomaterial issues. It's any material issue that is important to the buyer or concerns regarding any particular area of interest. So material issue could be what, Mark? Maybe they don't want to buy near a power line.
Well, yeah, that's a good example. Don't want to have power lines in the overhead in the backyard. I was thinking about maybe the buyer wants a property where they can park their 40-foot RV. That's a material issue to them. And this form isn't used very often, but I think buyer's agents could really help buyer's agents focus on a buyer's needs if they use that BMI form.
Mm-hmm. And then section C says the buyer agrees to indemnify, defend, and hold the broker harmless. In other words, if we're going to be sued, it's really not us being sued. It's really between the buyer and the seller because they're the party to the contract. Section 8 is pre-filled with, on the templates, the BIA, which we'll get to that form, and the statewide buyer-seller advisory, which is signed. Is it signed at this time, Mark? Do you have them sign it or do you not?
They can. I mean, it's just a good practice to give the SBSA at this point in time because it's a kind of a lengthy form and it's basically the buyer's and seller's job descriptions. So it's helpful for a buyer to know those things.
Okay. 9 addresses attorney fees if we're ever in a dispute regarding the obligation to pay this compensation of the BRE, then the buyer broker shall be entitled to receive reasonable attorney fees and costs except as provided in paragraph 11A. 10 addresses, this is the entire agreement. There is no other agreements out there. It's only this one. If we get into a dispute, we're going to agree, Mr. Buyer, to mediate our dispute. In other words, if we feel that you owe us money and because you breached the agreement, we're going to agree to go to mediation. And here's the terms. Now, have I ever done that? No, because it's sometimes going to be a hard case to prove. And the attorney fees would pretty much take up all of what the commission would have been anyway. So it's a case-by-case basis on that.
There's a reminder there on 3C. I mean, what was it, 11C? Advisory. Yeah, 11C, I'm sorry. Like we talked about during the listing agreement, that form arbitration agreement is never ever used. So you would not ever incorporate that into a buyer representation agreement, because as a brokerage, we have a choice of whether we want to participate in arbitration, and we've chosen to not participate. So we would never sign that form.
And you're going to enter the buyer's contact information. Get in the habit of doing that, because it'll help you when you realize that you haven't built a database and you're going to go finally build it. Well, you can go back to these old documents. I was going to put AOL just to be smart ass. And then the broker, the firm is Keller Williams Realty, San Diego Metro, or Signature. The office's DRE number, and then your name and the DRE number, and the office address and the telephone as well, and an email address as well. You need the email addresses if you're going to digitally sign. Okay, so you save that form. Okay, that form has been saved. Now let's go back and look at the addendum on compensation. So this was the compensation schedule in section 3. And I'm sorry if I'm breezing through this because I have less than 10 minutes to finish this. But this basically outlines what the compensation is. If you selected option 3, you didn't select option 1 where you put in the percentage, or option 2 where you put in the dollar amount. We've come up with these, or my predecessor and Mark came up with these years ago. We should get the compensation for all properties listed in the MLS. And so we'll accept the cooperating broker commission offered by the listing agent, which again is that credit that we give that buyer. For properties offered for sale by owner or not otherwise listed, I'm going to go help negotiate a commission with the seller to be paid out of seller funds at close of escrow. And for item 3, for properties offered for sale by developers or builders, you agree to permit me to accompany you on your first visit to a new home sales office to register as your representative. This is key. If you have a buyer looking and you know there's new homes development in that area, you don't want them going there without you, because the new home development says you have to you have to register them and you need to be there. So tell your buyers, please, if you go to that, please call me first. I need to accompany you on that.
Robert, one strategy I've heard with that for new home development is if your buyer's interested in that, you find every new home development in, the Sunday paper or wherever it's listed that they want to go look at, and you go and do all of those first. And if they don't pull the trigger on any of those, then you go to the resale market. So that's one strategy you can use. Like that.
And then item 4, for any property under the terms of this agreement that we were prevented from being able to participate, this basically says you'd be responsible if you breach the agreement. So that's what this is the one they're probably going to have the most issue with, but it's what's going to protect you to make sure you get paid. And again, we haven't chased after a buyer because it's a case-by-case basis on how they want to go after it. And if it's there's even a case to be made for it. That's I think we covered a lot of the stuff.
Anybody have any questions?
And of course, I hope you're not too let down that we didn't make an hour meeting that into an hour and a half or 2 hours, because we really were able to get through this.
So maybe in closing, we could just say that, there's a lot of members on the call here that have coaches. Talk to your coach about strategies for using the buyer representation agreement. What we've presented today is not the only way it can be used. And then if you do have questions, reach out to us. Yvette, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
The addendum, the ADM 1, that's part of the template that's already preloaded?
Yeah, and actually, if you're using the KW Metro templates like we've talked about a little bit before and installed that in your zip form personal edition, what you'll see when you create a new transaction is the buyer representation agreement in the buyer transaction. And there's also a README file in there, a PDF that has instructions on how to use it and why we created that BRE-ADM1 file. So.
We're not seeing that on today's training because I have not downloaded the templates. So I need to do that. So I'm in the zip form broker edition. All right, that said, everybody, I am going to thank everybody. Mark, thank you for your participation today. Next Tuesday, 1 o'clock, we're going to break into 2 sessions of the RPA next Tuesday, Thursday. That's a lengthy one because it's 16 pages long, the RPA, in addition to every other document that comes with. All right, guys, have a great day and we'll chat